The trouble usually starts long before the incident review. Someone quietly notices that a critical system still depends on a shared admin account, or that customer data is being copied into an unvetted analytics workspace, or that a third-party integration is far more privileged than anyone remembers. They mention it in a hallway aside, maybe drop it in a chat thread, and then stop. The risk is obvious, but so is the unwritten rule. Do not be the person who turns this into a thing unless you are ready to own it forever. On paper, the company has all the right policies. In practice, the culture says, don't tell anyone. This narration is part of the Wednesday headline feature from Bare Metal Cyber magazine, developed by Bare Metal Cyber. It treats your culture of disclosure as a core part of the security architecture, not as a soft, optional extra. Over the next few years, as your environment becomes more distributed and your dependencies more opaque, your real advantage will not come from one more scanner or one more dashboard. It will come from how quickly your people feel safe raising uncomfortable truths and how reliably those signals turn into action rather than into career risk. For leaders and senior practitioners, this is not abstract theory. It is the difference between being blindsided in front of regulators and boards or dealing with problems when they are still small and mostly internal. In most organizations, the strongest security policy is not the one in the handbook. It is the one enforced by stories. People remember what happened to the engineer who raised a critical issue just before a big launch, or the analyst who flagged a risky vendor a week before contract renewal. Maybe that person was thanked in public but quietly sidelined, or buried in remediation work with no backup. Those stories travel faster than any awareness campaign. They teach a simple lesson. It is safer to stay quiet, or to speak up only when consensus has already formed. The result is a shadow policy of silence that coexists with the official see something, say something language. You see that shadow policy in the small behaviors. A developer softens the language in a risk register so it does not sound alarmist. A product manager waits a sprint or two before logging a security concern, hoping it will resolve itself or turn into someone else's problem. A cloud engineer sends a private message instead of opening a ticket, just to test how nervous security really is. None of this is malice. It is self-preservation in an environment where the cost of being associated with a problem feels higher than the cost of leaving it only half acknowledged. The formal processes are there, but they become a last resort rather than a first line of defense. Leaders often underestimate how quickly the culture learns from their reactions. One combative response in a post-incident review, one executive who demands to know who approved this before understanding the context, one moment where early reporters are treated as convenient scapegoats, and the message is clear. Over time, people internalize that leadership will tolerate risk more readily than it will tolerate discomfort. If you want a culture of disclosure, the first step is to recognize that this unspoken rule probably exists already, and that it will remain the default until you actively replace it with something better. If you talk to the people closest to the systems, very few of them are truly reckless. They see the risks. They understand the blast radius of a shared key, an overprivileged service account, or an unpatched internet-facing application. The problem is not awareness, it is calculus. Reporting early often feels like volunteering for a second job with unclear support, unclear end date, and very clear visibility when things go wrong. Ambitious people have learned to conserve their political and emotional energy for issues that leadership clearly prioritizes. Everything else gets parked in a notebook, in a personal backlog, or in a quiet side conversation that never becomes an official record. The friction points are mostly structural. Reporting channels are slow, noisy, or opaque, so a high signal concern lands in the same queue as routine hygiene work and languishes there for weeks. Thresholds are fuzzy. People are not sure whether a finding is big enough to justify escalation, especially if it might derail a roadmap or draw scrutiny to a popular initiative. Ownership models are muddled, which means that whoever logs the issue often becomes the de facto long-term owner, even if they lack authority to touch the underlying system. Layer on performance frameworks that reward on-time delivery and smooth status reports, and the rational choice is to avoid being the source of disruptive truth. There is also a real social and political cost to making others look bad. When an engineer raises a risk in a shared platform, they are, in practice, pointing at someone else's design decision or technical debt. When a risk manager highlights gaps in a high-profile transformation, they may be seen as attacking a favorite program. In organizations where relationships and perception matter as much as outcomes, people quickly learn that making waves can stall careers. The behavior looks like caution, but it is an outcome of the systems and incentives leaders have created. If you want smart people to bring you bad news early, you have to treat their reluctance as a design problem rather than a character flaw. Psychological safety can sound like a soft concept until you connect it directly to time to discovery and time to containment. In environments where people believe they will be punished, humiliated, or quietly sidelined for surfacing issues, signals arrive late and heavily filtered. In environments where raising a concern is seen as doing your job well, signals arrive earlier and in richer detail. That difference shows up in hard numbers: how many issues you catch internally versus those discovered by customers, regulators, auditors, or external researchers, and how often you are genuinely surprised by the scope of an incident. Treating psychological safety as a security control means adding these dynamics to your threat model. The mechanics are practical and specific. Blameless post-incident reviews shift the conversation from who is at fault to what allowed this outcome. Safe harbor language in your policies tells people that if they report issues promptly and honestly, the organization will focus first on fixing the problem instead of punishing the messenger. Separating the act of finding from the burden of owning makes it clear that the person who raises a concern is not automatically stuck with the entire remediation journey. Over time, these practices build muscle memory. When someone notices something that feels off, the expected move becomes saying it out loud, logging it in the system, and trusting that there is machinery in place around them. Consistency is the hard part, especially under pressure. It is easy to talk about blamelessness until a disclosure threatens a key launch, an executive pet project, or public reputation. Those are the moments when people pay the closest attention to your behavior. If you stay curious instead of combative, protect the people who told you the truth, and focus scrutiny on the system rather than on the individual, you are rewriting the organization's stories about what happens to truth-tellers. Over months and years, that story becomes one of your strongest security assets, a steady flow of early, honest signals from the people who see risk first. Culture sets expectations, but plumbing determines whether those expectations survive contact with reality. Many organizations encourage people to raise issues early and then give them a maze of fragmented channels. Send an email to security, create a ticket in one of several systems, mention it in stand-up, drop it in a chat channel, log it in a governance tool, or talk to a manager. Each path has different visibility, different latency, and different chances of follow-through. The result is predictable. Important concerns bounce around, get duplicated, or simply disappear. If you want a culture of disclosure that actually works, you need clear pipes for early reporting and a predictable experience for the person sending the signal. A solid approach is to define a small set of intake paths, tuned to different kinds of issues. One path for product and application security concerns, one for infrastructure and platform hygiene, one for vendor and third-party risk, and one for suspicious behavior or potential incidents. These paths should show up inside tools people already use: a chatbot that turns a concern into a ticket with the right metadata, a simple form that routes to the correct triage queue, or a clearly labeled option in your incident management platform for early warnings alongside active incidents. The important part is that when someone uses one of these paths, they know what will happen next, who will triage the issue, how quickly it will be looked at, and how they will be kept informed. Routing and visibility matter just as much as intake. If early reports disappear into a private inbox or into a black box queue, people stop trusting the system. Leaders can design for layered visibility, where local teams see the items they own, central security teams see cross-cutting patterns, and senior leadership gets a periodic view of high-severity signals and systemic themes. Lightweight status updates, such as whether an item has been triaged, accepted, is in remediation, or has been formally risk accepted, help reporters see that their concern is moving, even if they are not directly responsible for the fix. Over time, this teaches the organization that when someone raises an uncomfortable truth, the pipes carry it somewhere useful instead of letting it evaporate. Metrics are the next part of the system. If you only measure outages, incidents, and audit findings, you are grading the fire department purely on how often the building burns, not on how often someone smells smoke and calls it in. A culture of disclosure needs metrics that make early signals visible and valuable. That starts with tracking how issues enter the system, how long it takes from first detection to first report, how many weaknesses are discovered internally, and how many different roles contribute to the signal stream, from engineers and analysts to product owners and customer-facing staff. When leaders can see regular, healthy reporting from across the organization, they can distinguish between "we have no problems" and "we have problems that no one is talking about." Ratios tell a particularly powerful story. The proportion of issues discovered internally versus those found by customers, external researchers, regulators, or auditors is a direct measure of how well your internal eyes are working. Tracking how often early reports materially change an outcome is just as important. Maybe a risky change is rolled back before release, a vendor deal is repriced because of security concerns, or a configuration is fixed before an attacker stumbles across it. When leaders can point to concrete examples where someone's early call-out prevented something worse from happening, they link disclosure behavior to real business outcomes. That narrative reinforces the message more effectively than any slogan on a slide. At the same time, you need to avoid vanity metrics that encourage gaming or silence. Counting raw ticket volumes without context can drive noise. Measuring only the number of critical issues resolved can lead to severity inflation or to underreporting of borderline concerns. The most useful view combines quantitative trends with qualitative review. Regular forums where leaders look at a small sample of early reports and ask what enabled them, what slowed them down, and how the system responded will tell you more than a spreadsheet ever will. The goal is simple. When someone looks at your dashboards and hears your stories, it should be obvious that early, honest reporting is how individuals and teams earn trust, not how they lose it. All of these ideas are easy to agree with until disclosure collides with something existential. A major customer, a regulatory deadline, a flagship product launch, or a reputation that already feels fragile. These are the moments when leaders are tempted to manage optics first and truth second. A team surfaces a serious vulnerability days before a keynote announcement, or an internal investigation reveals that an exposure has been sitting in logs for months. The instinctive response is often to narrow the circle, soften the language, and look for ways to satisfy obligations with the least embarrassment. Everyone watching learns the same lesson. Full disclosure is dangerous when the stakes are high. There is another way to handle those moments, and it is uncomfortable but powerful. Leaders who are serious about a culture of disclosure behave predictably when the news is bad and the timing is awful. They thank the team that brought the issue forward, even when the consequences are painful. They ask for clear facts and uncertainties instead of hunting for culprits. They insist on honest timelines that show what was known when, who had which information, and where signals were missed or downplayed. When regulators, customers, or boards need to be informed, those conversations are grounded in that factual spine, not in wishful thinking. The situation is still hard, but it becomes coherent, and it reinforces the idea that truth-telling, is not negotiable.
These high-stakes disclosures expose real trade-offs. Leaders may have to decide whether to delay a launch, pause a migration, renegotiate a vendor relationship, or accept short-term reputational damage to avoid a bigger hit later. When the people closest to the systems are involved in those decisions, they see that their early warning mattered, and that leadership is willing to absorb some pain in order to act on it. When they are excluded or pressured to minimize their findings, they learn the opposite lesson. Over time, your track record in these episodes becomes the real policy on disclosure. People will remember not what you said about transparency at the all-hands meeting, but what happened when someone's early warning threatened a prized narrative.
At its heart, this entire topic is about whether your organization treats uncomfortable truth as a liability or as an asset. A culture of "don't tell anyone" does not just delay bad news, it reshapes your risk profile. Manageable weaknesses turn into career-ending incidents. Quiet design flaws turn into public crises. A culture of report early, fix faster does not eliminate mistakes or surprises, but it changes when you learn about them and how much room you have to maneuver once you do. The same systems, tools, and frameworks can exist in either culture and produce radically different outcomes. Closing the gap starts with seeing disclosure culture as part of your security architecture. The stories people tell about past truth-tellers, the friction in your reporting pathways, the metrics you put on dashboards, and the way you behave when disclosure gets painful all send a single coherent signal. That signal tells people either that it is safe and worthwhile to surface risk early, or that it is safer to keep quiet. When leaders back up their words with predictable reactions, clear pipes, and visible rewards for early, honest signals, they tilt the entire system toward faster learning and smaller shocks. From here, the most useful moves are straightforward. Ask your teams how safe they feel raising bad news before it is fully formed, and listen to the stories that follow. Take a few recent issues and trace them from first detection to final decision, paying attention to where signals slowed down, softened, or died entirely. Then decide, deliberately, how you want people to feel the next time they see something worrying. The organizations that make that decision on purpose and keep honoring it when the stakes are high will be the ones that learn faster than their attackers and their competitors.
Thanks for listening. For more audio courses, daily newsletters, and more, please visit baremetalcyber.com.